the dense, remote forests of the Pacific Northwest, there was an old cabin that had long been abandoned. Overgrown with ivy and surrounded by towering pines, the structure was barely visible from the nearby hiking trails. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning others to steer clear of the place, claiming it was cursed. But for Jamie, an adventurous photographer looking for inspiration, it was the perfect opportunity. Jamie had recently lost her job and was feeling the weight of uncertainty. Her friends suggested a weekend getaway to recharge, and the idea of capturing the beauty of the forest appealed to her. So she packed her camera, some supplies, and set off alone, determined to find the infamous cabin. The hike was challenging but invigorating. The further she ventured from the well-trodden paths, the more isolated she felt. After hours of walking, she finally stumbled upon the cabin, hidden beneath a canopy of trees. It stood in eerie silence, its once bright paint now peeling and faded. Jamie's heart raced with excitement and curiosity. She stepped inside, the door creaking ominously. Dust motes floated in the sunlight that filtered through grimy windows, and the air was thick with the smell of damp wood. Old furniture lay strewn about, covered in sheets, and a stone fireplace dominated one wall. Jamie set up her camera, eager to capture the haunting beauty of the place. As she explored, she found remnants of lives once lived, faded photographs, a rusted kettle, and a child's toy, half buried under a layer of dust. An unsettling feeling crept over her, but she pushed it aside, attributing it to her imagination. After hours of shooting, she decided to stay the night, thinking it would be a unique experience. As dusk fell, the cabin transformed, shadows lengthened, and the forest outside grew eerily quiet. Jamie built a small fire in the fireplace, its crackling flames providing warmth and light. She settled into an old armchair, scrolling through her photos and feeling a sense of accomplishment. But as night deepened, she began to hear sounds, soft thumps, almost like footsteps, coming from outside. Jamie's heart raced. She brushed it off as wildlife, but the noises continued, now accompanied by an occasional whisper, indistinct yet unsettling. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself. "It's just the wind." Deciding to investigate, Jamie grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside. The moon illuminated the forest in a silvery glow, but the shadows danced in the corners of her vision. She scanned the area, her breath quickening as she felt an unseen presence. Just as she was about to turn back, she caught a glimpse of movement among the trees, a shadowy figure that seemed to dart away from the light. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. No response. Returning to the cabin, she locked the door and tried to shake off the feeling of unease. She crawled into her sleeping bag, hoping sleep would come quickly. But it didn't. Instead, the whispers grew louder, echoing through her mind, until they became a cacophony of voices. Panic set in. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a restless sleep filled with dreams of the cabin and shadowy figures looming just outside her window. The next morning, Jamie awoke to the sound of scratching at the door. Heart pounding, she sat up and listened intently. The noise persisted, soft, persistent, almost pleading. Grabbing her camera for protection, she approached the door and cautiously opened it. Nothing, just the stillness of the forest. Confused, she stepped outside and scanned the area. That's when she noticed something on the ground, a small, crumpled piece of paper, half buried in the dirt. She picked it up and unfolded it, revealing a hastily scrawled note. "They won't let you leave." Chilled, Jamie's thoughts raced. Was this a prank, or was someone trying to warn her? The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface now bubbled over. She decided it was time to leave. Gathering her belongings, she quickly packed up and prepared for the hike back to her car. But as she stepped outside, the forest felt different. The air was heavy, and the path seemed unfamiliar. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't find the way back. The trees, once friendly companions, now loomed over her, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for her. Hours passed as she wandered through the woods, calling out for help, but only silence answered. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, surrounding her. "You shouldn't have come here. You can't leave." Just when she thought all hope was lost, Jamie stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood a massive tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted. At its base, she spotted something half buried in the leaves. She knelt down and uncovered a rusted locket. Opening it, she found a photograph of a young girl who looked eerily familiar, eyes wide with fear, mirroring her own. A chill ran down her spine as she felt the ground shift beneath her. It was as if the forest itself was alive, closing in around her. Desperate, Jamie sprinted in the opposite direction, her heart racing. The whispers morphed into frantic cries, urging her to stop, to turn back. Just as she thought she'd be consumed by the darkness, she spotted a glimmer of light. It was her car, parked just beyond the trees. She pushed herself to run faster, adrenaline fueling her escape. As she reached the vehicle, she fumbled for her keys, hands shaking. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed behind her. She turned just in time to see the tree from the clearing topple over, as if the forest itself was protesting her departure. With a final burst of energy, she jumped into her car, slamming the door shut and locking it. Jamie sped away, the road twisting and turning as she navigated through the woods. The whispers faded into the distance, but the sense of dread lingered, clinging to her like a shadow. She glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the cabin or something watching her, but there was nothing, only the dark expanse of trees. As she drove, her mind raced with thoughts of the girl in the locket and the warning scrawled in the dirt. Had someone else been trapped in that cabin? What had happened to the family that once lived there? She couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something far darker than she could comprehend. Once she reached the safety of the main road, Jamie vowed never to return to those woods. The photographs she had taken that weekend were haunting reminders of her experience, and as she reviewed them later, she noticed something chilling in the background of one image, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the trees, watching her with hollow eyes. Days turned into weeks, but the experience lingered in her mind, a dark cloud that wouldn't dissipate. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Jamie decided to research the cabin and its history. She discovered that several families had lived in that area, many of whom had vanished without a trace over the years. The locals' warnings echoed in her mind. As she continued her research, she stumbled upon newspaper articles recounting similar stories, people who had gone missing in the woods, never to be found. It seemed that the cabin had drawn others in, just as it had drawn her. Determined to uncover the truth, Jamie contacted local historians and old-timers in the town. Each person she spoke to had their own chilling story of strange occurrences, ghostly figures, and the feeling of being trapped in a place where time didn't exist. As she pieced together the stories, Jamie realized that the cabin was not just a physical structure. It was a vessel for something darker, a malevolent force that thrived on fear and despair. It had lured her in, whispering promises of adventure, but it had sought to claim her soul. Though she had escaped, she felt a lingering connection to the cabin, as if it were watching her from the shadows. Despite the fear that gripped her, Jamie couldn't shake the need to return, to confront whatever dark presence resided there. Weeks later, equipped with a stronger resolve and a group of friends willing to support her, she planned a return to the cabin. This time, she would not go alone. They arrived as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the forest. The air felt charged, almost electric, as they approached the cabin, a sense of foreboding hanging in the air. They set up camp outside, determined to document any paranormal activity. As night fell, the woods came alive with sounds, rustling leaves, distant hoots of owls, and the occasional snap of twigs. But soon, they were joined by the whispers, soft at first but growing louder, wrapping around them like a chilling embrace. Jamie's friends, initially skeptical, began to feel the weight of the atmosphere. As they gathered around a fire, telling ghost stories, they started to see shadows flitting between the trees. One friend, Mark, jokingly called out, "Is anyone out there? Show yourself." His laughter echoed through the stillness, but it was met with silence. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and a gust of wind swept through the clearing. The fire flickered violently, casting long shadows on the trees. Then, without warning, they heard a voice, clear and distinct, cutting through the darkness. "Leave now." Before it's too late, panic surged among them. They huddled closer, the jovial atmosphere replaced by a palpable fear. Jamie felt her heart race as she realized they had ventured into the very depths of the darkness she had felt alone. In a bid to prove there was nothing to fear, she suggested they explore the cabin together. Reluctantly, her friends agreed. though the sense of dread clung to them as they approached the door. They stepped inside, and the oppressive silence enveloped them. As they wandered through the rooms, Jamie pointed out the remnants she had discovered before. But her friends seemed distracted, their attention drawn to something outside the window. They rushed to the glass, eyes wide with terror. "There's someone out there," one of them exclaimed. Heart pounding, Jamie turned to look. Outside, in the shadows of the trees, stood a figure child, gazing back at them with hollow eyes. But when Jamie blinked, the figure vanished. "Did you see that?" Jamie whispered, trembling. Her friends nodded, but fear was palpable in the air. They decided to leave, heading back to the safety of the fire. But as they turned to exit, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The sound reverberated through the cabin, and they scrambled to open it, panic escalating. Jamie pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, filling the space around them. "Let us out," someone shouted, but the cabin felt alive, pressing in on them, as if it were feeding off their fear. Desperation clawed at Jamie as she banged on the door, pleading for it to open. But the whispers only grew louder, a chorus of tormented souls. Just then, a voice broke through the chaos, a low, haunting sound that resonated deep within her. "You shouldn't have come back. You're mine now." In that moment, Jamie felt the weight of the cabin's history crashing down on her. The tales she had uncovered were real, and the darkness that had lured her back was far more powerful than she could comprehend. With a surge of adrenaline, she turned to her friends, who were equally panicked. "We need to stick together. We have to find another way out." They moved through the cabin, looking for an escape. In a bedroom, Jamie noticed a window slightly ajar. "Over here," she shouted, leading her friends to the window. They pushed against it with all their might, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers intensified, drowning out their voices, making it hard to think. Suddenly, one friend collapsed, clutching their head as if overwhelmed by the noise. "Get out," they cried. "It's too much." Fear took hold as Jamie struggled to keep her composure. She had to get her friends out. Gathering all her strength, she shouted, "We have to focus. We can't let it win." In a moment of clarity, Jamie remembered the locket, the photograph of the girl. "Maybe she's trapped here too. We have to help her." They began to chant, calling out to the spirit, asking for guidance, hoping to break the cabin's hold. As they spoke, the whispers shifted. The oppressive air seemed to lighten, and for the first time, Jamie felt a flicker of hope. The window trembled, and with a final push, it flew open, revealing the night sky. "Go! Go!" Jamie shouted, ushering her friends through the opening one by one. They climbed out, gasping for breath as they landed on the ground below. Jamie was the last to jump, but as she turned to escape, she felt a cold hand grasp her wrist, holding her back. She screamed as the shadows closed in, pulling her toward the cabin. In a moment of desperation, she remembered the locket in her pocket. With all her strength, she threw it into the cabin, shouting, "You can't have me." In an instant, the shadows recoiled, releasing their grip. Jamie stumbled back, and her friends grabbed her, pulling her away from the cabin. They ran through the woods, adrenaline propelling them forward, until they finally reached the safety of the main road. They collapsed on the pavement, gasping for breath, the weight of the experience crashing over them. The whispers faded into the night, but the fear lingered. Though they had escaped, the memory of that night haunted Jamie. The cabin stood behind them, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, still and foreboding. As they drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows of Oak Hollow would always remain, waiting for their next victim. In the years that followed, Jamie often found herself looking back at that cabin, at the stories it held and the darkness that thrived within. It became a part of her, a haunting reminder of the thin line between curiosity and danger, and the unseen forces that could lie in wait, ready to claim the unwary. And as she drove away from Oak Hollow, she understood that some places are best left undisturbed, forever shrouded in mystery and darkness. Emily had always loved her small apartment in the city. It was cozy, just big enough for her and her cat, Luna. After a long day at work, she enjoyed curling up with a good book or binge-watching her favorite shows. However, one evening, as she settled in for the night, an unsettling feeling crept over her. It started with a knock at the door. Emily glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. The knocking persisted, a steady thud that echoed through the silence of her apartment. She hesitated, unsure of who it could be. "Hello?" she called out, her voice slightly trembling. No response came, just the continued knocking. Taking a deep breath, she peered through the peephole. A man stood there, his features obscured by shadows. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Something about his presence sent a chill down her spine. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, I need to use your phone. My car broke down, and I can't get a signal," he replied, his tone pleading. Emily's instinct screamed at her to stay away. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," she said, backing away from the door. "Just let me in for a moment. I promise I won't be trouble," he insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "I really need help." She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite place it. "I'll call someone for you," she offered, reaching for her phone. "No," his voice rose sharply, and her heart raced at the sudden intensity. "I need to come in, please." Fear coursed through her. She quickly glanced at Luna, who was now perched on the windowsill, watching intently. "I'm calling the police," Emily said firmly. "Why would you do that?" His tone shifted again, becoming almost calm. "I'm not a bad guy. I'm just stranded." In a moment of panic, Emily moved to her phone, her hands shaking. As she dialed, she caught sight of the man stepping back from the door, frustration etched on his face. "Just wait, I can explain," he called through the door. The police dispatcher answered, and Emily whispered her situation, her voice barely above a whisper. The operator assured her help was on the way, and as she hung up, she turned back to the door. The man was gone. Relief flooded over her, but it was short-lived. She quickly checked the locks, securing the door tightly. As she settled back onto the couch, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't seen the last of him. A few hours later, the knock returned. It was softer this time, almost tentative. Emily's heart raced as she glanced at the clock. It was now well past midnight. She held her breath, waiting for it to stop, but it continued, rhythmic and persistent. "Go away," she shouted, her voice trembling. "Emily, it's me. I just want to talk," the man's voice called softly through the door. "I'm really sorry about earlier." Panic gripped her. How did he know her name? "Leave me alone," she screamed, scrambling for her phone again. "Please, just let me explain. I didn't mean to scare you," he pleaded, but his words fell on deaf ears as she dialed 911 once more. "Help is coming," she whispered, clutching the phone tightly. She could hear the man breathing heavily outside, the sound of him shifting his weight. "Emily, please, I'm not dangerous. I just need a place to stay for a bit. I'll leave after that." The urgency in his voice twisted her stomach. Just then, she noticed a shadow move outside her window. Her heart sank as she realized he wasn't just at her door, he was circling the building. "Where are you?" she whispered to herself, eyes wide with fear. The sound of her heartbeat drowned out everything else. Moments later, she heard the faint sound of glass breaking. It was followed by a soft thud. Emily's blood ran cold as she recognized the sound the man was trying to break in. "Emily," he called again, desperation turning to anger. "Let me in." In a panic, she ran to her bedroom, locking the door behind her. Luna meowed anxiously, sensing her distress. Emily grabbed her phone, trying to think of a way out. The back window was an option, but it felt risky. Just then, she heard the front door slam open. Her heart raced as she heard footsteps echo through her apartment. The sound was heavy, purposeful. "Where are you?" he shouted, his voice now menacing. "You can't hide forever." Emily felt paralyzed with fear. She held her breath, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. She could hear him moving through the living room, searching. "I just want to talk," he yelled again, but the underlying threat in his tone was unmistakable. Then silence. Emily dared to breathe again, listening intently. The silence stretched on, her heart pounding in her ears. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, she heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. She couldn't let him know she was waiting for help. With trembling hands, she opened the bedroom window and glanced down to Stories. It was a dangerous drop, but she had no choice. The sirens grew louder, and she knew she had to act fast. Just as she was about to climb out, she heard the bedroom door slam open. "Emily," he shouted, fury in his voice. Panic surged as she climbed out the window, grasping the ledge. She dropped down, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through her ankle, but adrenaline propelled her forward. She ran towards the sound of the sirens, desperate to reach safety. Behind her, she heard him scream, "You can't escape." As she reached the street, two police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Officers rushed towards her, concern etched on their faces. "What's going on?" One of them asked, guiding her towards the safety of the car. "That man, he's in my apartment," he broke in. She gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. The officers exchanged quick glances, then one of them rushed inside, while another stayed with her. They reassured her, but her heart was still racing. A few moments later, they emerged, the other officer leading the man out in handcuffs. He glared at Emily, eyes wild. "You'll regret this," he shouted, his voice dripping with rage. Emily shuddered as the officers loaded him into the back of the squad car. She felt a mixture of relief and fear, knowing that she had narrowly escaped a terrifying situation. As the adrenaline faded, she realized that she had faced a danger she never expected. Her home, once a sanctuary, had become a site of horror. But as she watched the man being driven away, she knew she had made the right choice. She would never again take her safety for granted. That night, as she locked every door and window, she realized that some strangers are more dangerous than they appear. The world outside her cozy apartment, once familiar, now felt fraught with unseen threats. She vowed to stay vigilant, for her safety and for Luna's. And though she would eventually return to the comfort of her home, a piece of her would always remain wary, forever changed by the encounter with the stranger at her door. Leela had always been drawn to antiques, so when she stumbled upon a vintage mirror at a local flea market, she couldn't resist. The frame was ornate, with intricate designs that hinted at a rich history. She bought it on a whim and hung it in her living room, excited to give her space a touch of elegance. The first few days passed without incident. Leela admired the mirror, often catching glimpses of herself as she moved around the room. But soon, she began to notice something unsettling. Whenever she looked at the mirror, her reflection appeared slightly off. It wasn't just the angle. Her smile was a second too late, her movements a fraction behind her own. At first, she dismissed it as fatigue or perhaps the quirks of an old piece, but the feeling of unease grew. One night, as she settled in with a book, she caught sight of something in the mirror, a shadowy figure standing just behind her. She whipped around, but the room was empty. The next evening, she tried to ignore the growing dread. As she brushed her hair in front of the mirror, she saw it again, a darker shape lingering in the background. This time, her reflection seemed to smirk, eyes glinting with a malevolent spark. Leela's heart raced. "Stop it," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. Determined to find an explanation, she did some research. She learned that mirrors can hold energy, even spirits, if they've been passed down through generations. Some believe they could trap souls or memories. Leela felt a chill run down her spine. What had she brought into her home? That night, unable to sleep, she lay in bed, listening to the soft creaks of the old house. Around 2 a.m., the scratching began, a gentle tapping, like fingernails on glass. It came from the mirror. Heart pounding, she crept into the living room. As she approached, the air grew cold. The scratching intensified, sounding more like a frantic plea. In a moment of terror, Leela leaned in close to the mirror, whispering, "What do you want?" Suddenly, the reflection twisted, showing a different scene. A woman standing in a dark room, her face pale and terrified. The woman turned, her eyes locking with Leela's, and for a brief moment, she could feel the panic radiating from the reflection. Then the scene changed, and Leela gasped as the woman seemed to reach out, her fingers brushing against the surface of the glass. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in Leela's mind. Leela stumbled back, horrified. She realized the mirror wasn't just a reflection, it was a prison. The figure had been trapped, crying out for help. With trembling hands, Leela grabbed a hammer from the kitchen and returned, resolve hardening her fear. As she raised the hammer, the whispering grew frantic. "No, don't break it." The voice was now desperate, filled with anguish. But Leela didn't hesitate. She swung hard, shattering the glass. Shards flew everywhere, and as they fell, the temperature in the room plummeted. The whispers faded to silence, and Leela felt an overwhelming sense of release. She collapsed to the floor, panting, the remnants of the mirror glinting in the moonlight. In the days that followed, Leela felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She disposed of the broken pieces, determined to move on. But late at night, when the house was still, she sometimes heard a faint scratching sound, echoing from the darkness. And she wondered if she had truly freed the woman or if she had merely angered the spirit that still lingered, waiting for its chance to escape. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.